Hey, thanks for joining Sales with Suli, a mom of three who spent the last 12 summers knocking doors. Welcome to my podcast where I talk about all things women, the ups and downs of my journey, and what it takes to find success on and off the doors. Go ahead and enjoy part 2 of this episode. So 2019, I ended up running a team with my best friend's husband. We were in Nashville, and this summer was super fun. It was basically where I broke my records from the past. So in New Jersey, I did 457 serviced accounts, and my average contract value was about like 445 that summer. The year in Vegas, even though that poly team, losing all the people, going through all the things, still did 401 accounts that year. And then in Nashville, we had a huge team, and being able to understand what my weaknesses were from the years past, and knowing the importance of sometimes there are going to be people who are going to just want a male figure on the team, and there are going to be other reps on the team who don't care, who just want to look at experience, who just want the advice. And it became a fun summer in the sense where pest control was just money in Nashville. And I ended up having my best summer up until that point, where I had did 701 serviced accounts. The tricky thing with 2019, this was a year that I was pregnant with Bobby Ray, the end of 2018, leading to 2019. So before actually having that best summer, I was actually diagnosed with placenta. I still have a hard time saying it. Placenta previa and placenta accreta. So what that is, it makes it where it's super hard for a woman to be able to give birth. And so I have a dead tumor in my body, and what happens is, to be able to have a natural birth, I'd have to have that dead tumor removed. And so being diagnosed with both of these put me at a really high risk for giving birth. And I didn't know, or because I had 2 kids previous, or not to another marriage, because I had 2 kids prior to Bobby Ray, I was like, yeah, I don't need to see any doctors. I'm totally fine. We didn't really go get checked. I didn't really go to doctor's appointments. I was just at the best place physically, health-wise. I wasn't too overweight with Bobby Ray like I was with Ty and Anarisa. And so I just ignored a lot of things. And it came to the 20th week, and I realized, holy cow, we haven't even seen a doctor, and I'm halfway through this pregnancy. And we ended up going and seeing a doctor, and they were like, okay, well, you need to start going and getting scans. This wasn't at 20 weeks. I think I was probably 16 to 18 weeks with Bobby Ray. So we did. And we've gone to a couple of doctor's appointments. We see all his hands and all his fingers and see all his toes. The doctor does the normal things like everything's good to go. And so, we leave, and knowing that he's healthy. And, our next appointment, we find out that he's going to be a boy, and then we're super excited about that. And finally, way past being pregnant with Bobby Ray, probably about 22 weeks or maybe 23 weeks, we go in and see the doctor, and they're like, you should go and see a specialist. And I'm like, I'm not going to spend money on a specialist. I've already had 2 kids. They're going to be fine. We're going to do a C-section. And this is when we find out that I was diagnosed with placenta accreta and placenta previa. And so Walter was definitely more terrified than me. He joined like every Facebook group on the planet. He like at this point, I wanted him to tell me nothing about it, because it was just like a Debbie Downer on like hearing how like women who actually like died giving birth. And so what happens when you do have these things is a lot of women can just overbleed and bleed so much that they can like literally die, like giving birth to their kid. And there has been women who have died. And so I don't want to downplay that. But it was just hard to, you know, have my husband talk about all these different women who were having complications. And at the time, coming off the doors and getting prepped for the doors, you know, in 2019, I didn't want to think negatively, or I didn't want to think about those things, or I didn't want to think about my life. But it got to the point where the doctors were like, okay, you know, you need to be in a place, like you pretty much can't travel. Like you need to be in a place where you are always within a few miles of a hospital, because it got to the point where it was really bad. And I remember we had planned like this team trip that we were going to be going to. And I think it was going to be like 100 miles away. We were getting like our guys ready to go out to Nashville. And Walter was like, "You're not going." And I'm like, first of all, I'm going wherever I want. And he's like, "Well, we need to go and talk to a doctor first." So we go to the doctors, and Walter is legitimately wanting the doctor to tell me that we are not going on this trip, because I should be near a hospital at all times in case I'm ever bleeding or anything like that. It's just super important for me at this point in my pregnancy that I was going to be close to a hospital. And so luckily the doctor was on my side and was kind of like, "Oh, if you're feeling fine, yeah, go ahead and go." So we end up going. But during this time where we started feeling and understanding like how important taking care of myself was at this time, it started becoming nerve-wracking to me. But we thought everything was fine with Bobby Ray. And so I had a doctor's appointment, and I just thought it was just going to be a normal doctor's appointment. And during this appointment, I tell Walter, I don't know what he was doing. He was probably at work or something like that. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll just go." And so I go, and the doctor like looks at me and is just like, "Oh, hang on." And I'm like, "Hang on," in like the middle of a scan, and I'm like laying there on a table. And he comes back and he's like, "Is anyone here with you?" And I'm like, "No, it's just me." Like, "Okay, what do I need to do?" Turn sideways. And again, I'm just like nonchalant about like my son being in my stomach. And he's like, "Well, the good news is," and I'm like, "The good news," at this point, I'm like, "Just tell me what's wrong. Like, don't even tell me the good news about like anything. Like, what is wrong?" He's like, "Well, your son is healthy. Like, everything is totally fine." And he shows me the scans, and he's like, "Have you been going to like the doctors like all this time?" I was like, "Well, I didn't start going to like a couple months." And he's like, "Okay, and everything's been fine?" I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "They showed you his fingers and hands and all these things." I was like, "Yeah, I think so." And he's like, "Yeah, again, the good thing is he's healthy, but he doesn't have a left hand." And I immediately freaked out, and every possible thing that I could think of, like this time I just started crying. Like, I'm finally at a point in my life where I no longer cry when I tell this story. And he was just like, "Yeah, maybe when they were showing you the other scans, it was only just like the right hand you could ever see or whatnot." And I called Walter, and I was like, "I don't know what I did in my life. Like, I don't know what we did that our son is only going to be like having, you know, just going to be born with one hand." This was definitely the turning point for me in sales and going out and having my best summer at this time in Nashville. And so as our doctor's appointments are going and moving on, I kind of become more high risk the further along I'm going with Bobby Ray. And at this point, they're telling us that if I wanted to be able to keep working, or if I wanted to be alive, that we were going to have Bobby Ray early. And not for Bobby Ray's life, but for mine. And I was like, holy heck. And here's my thinking, like not even thinking about my life, but I was like, okay, how many weeks am I going to need to have before getting on the doors? Like, how many weeks am I going to have before I can actually go and knock my first door in Nashville? Like, legitimately knowing that they're telling me that my chance of like living, literally, I think was like 40 to 60% if everything went completely right. And all I was thinking about was exactly how many weeks that I needed to recover before getting on the doors. And so they tell us we had to look at dates, and we ended up choosing April 4th to be able to have Bobby Ray's C-section. It would mean that he was going to be coming out 6 weeks early than planned, but it was just going to give me a higher chance of not bleeding out on the table, because having those two symptoms, or having placenta accreta, just meant that I was just more likely to just bleed out to death on the table. And I'm laughing now, but it wasn't funny at the time. And so we chose April 4th because my aunt, Bobby, who Bobby Ray is named after, who actually raised me, we wanted to remember her as living. And so although her children probably look at this day as like, you know, her birthday, or, you know, the day of her death, we wanted to remember this day as a day of life, you know, for Bobby Ray. So we ended up choosing April 4th, and I kind of knew that it would give me exactly 4 weeks from giving birth to him. If I was going to be alive, I was going to have 4 weeks to recover, and I would be immediately on the doors by May 4th. Walter's pissed that I'm even thinking about getting on the doors. The doctors are annoyed that I'm even talking about going to go and like knock doors as I'm planning this guy's birthday so that I can get on the doors. And so as we prep and get ready for to give birth to Bobby Ray, you know, there was definitely a lot of prayers, and this became one of the turning points for me and my personal life, and finding out like who I was happened on that table. So all these years on the doors, when people look at Suli, they see the tough shell. They see always like dishing things out and whatnot. They're just like, I can handle anything. I just kept a lot like bottled up, and it took me almost losing my life to become completely aligned with the opposite ends of my emotions. And so April 4th comes around. I'm literally getting pulled back into the delivery room, and Walter is not allowed like back there. Like it's literally just me and like several doctors. We sit down and we prep, and it's just like, hey, like it's just going to be you like in this room. It's just going to be us. And this is when like everything in my life like hit me, like everything in my life like flashed, like the doors mattered no longer. Like the success mattered no longer. Like my life just mattered no longer at that point, aside from just I needed to live at that very like moment. And so when they pull me back to the living room, I'm like freaking out and crying, and all I remember is just like all the drugs. Like literally I was out, and woke up the next day in a room, and my family and friends were definitely like freaking out, like wanting to make sure whether I was alive or whatnot. Like so many people were definitely fasting on my behalf. And to be able to finally like wake up the next morning and hear the doctors say that they would check in at me at night, or that they would come and make sure that I was still alive, like I wasn't supposed to live. Like I was not supposed to them. It was a literal miracle that I was up and walking within like 3 days. Like they couldn't understand what I was doing on my feet. And Bobby Ray ended up being in the hospital a lot longer than he needed. And as soon as I knew that I was alive, all I was doing was planning and asking them exactly how many weeks did I need before I could be like on the doors in 2019. And so they told me all the things that I needed to do in the hospital to be able to be released. I had to be able to walk around. I had to be able to be off the meds. And so I made it a point to be walking back and forth like every day, like making sure that I was doing everything that I needed to. It was a big eye opener for me. And at the time, they also had to also help with the chances of me living. They needed to remove my uterus. And so, I mean, thankfully, Walter and I weren't planning on having any more kids, but the concept of knowing that it was permanent, it was a definite eye opener for me. And this year had become the year where I spent all the time, probably between like the end of 2018 and 2019, working on Suli. This is where I started the time of actually like finding out who I really was, like actually like loving myself. A lot of time people look at me and they're like, oh, you're so confident, like, oh, you're so successful, like, oh, you're all those things. But deep down, like mentally and eternally, like what I thought of myself had never matched what every person in my life every good person in my life had thought about me. And it took me almost losing my life to literally start finding out who I was and understanding that once I was okay with me, everything else was going to fall in place. And so a lot of times people and I share this story because it was the beginning of the journey that I'm on right now. To just understand that I truly am enough. A lot of people are like, well, what is your pitch? Like, what is it that you're saying on the doors? Like, what is it that you're doing? Like, what are the hours that you're working? Like, all of those things like play a role. But if you aren't understanding who you are mentally and emotionally, like behind closed doors, if you aren't understanding the way you feel about yourself when you're alone, you are not going to find success on the doors. You are not going to you are not going to get to a point of time in your success. You're basically going to hit a cap, at least from my perspective. Like being a woman, having my uterus removed, almost losing my life, and now finally, after 35 years, I spent like the last couple years actually just working on that. That is when my success started, was in 2019, being on the doors and spending that year being truly grateful every single day for all the little things. I spent a lot of time with like the girls that I'm working with and with the women and reminding them every single day we should be writing down things that we are excited about. Like the money's going to come and go. The sales are going to come and go. But the blessings are always going to be there if you look for them. I remember this year, like 2019, on my iPad, like every time someone was upset at me, I would write down 3 things that I was grateful for. And it even got to the point where I was like grateful for the color pink, or I was grateful for the color green, or I was grateful for the fact that I had 10 fingers or 10 toes, or all the little things that some of us probably take for granted. And 2019 comes around and I'm truly excited about like who I am and finding out who I am, that it just led to me actually hitting 701 accounts that year. And as I continued on the journey of just knowing and understanding Suli and where I fit in and creating space for myself, I had realized the importance of being able to create space for others and just seeing like how much we're lacking that here in the door-to-door industry. And so 2020 comes around. I'm like, I'm only going to be doing 250 accounts. Like literally, I'm just going to travel. Like I almost lost my life the year before. I ended with a great summer. I was definitely on a path where I like loved the person that I was becoming, that I was like, I'm just going to travel with my kids. Like we were just going to have fun. We were just going to live life. And then COVID hits. Oh, no. So before COVID hits, so I go out and do preseason in Tampa in 2020. And I forget how many accounts I did. I didn't do very many. My husband is the best. He keeps like a spreadsheet. I probably should have written it down of every single one of my sales. Anyhow, I go and do a few, and we were in a point of our lives where we just like felt like super blessed. So not having our tenants, pay rent or anything like that. And I went and did like super well in like a month. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 250 accounts. And then my husband was actually told that he wasn't going to have a job until hopefully like October. And I was like, holy hell. Like we are screwed, with all of our finances tied up in investments. We were definitely like cash poor, and we had just told people that they didn't have to pay rent and all these things. And I knew that I was going to have to just put my head down and just work. I had just focused on meditating. If any of you guys have not read The Miracle Morning, I didn't know that I was doing every single one of these concepts until after 2020 when I read it. But if you're in sales and you haven't read that book, you definitely should. So I'm like, okay, so I'm putting my head down, I'm knocking, and I look up and it's midsummer, and I'm like, holy cow. I had no goals for 2020 in the sense of like, I didn't have a number that I was going to hit. It was just kind of like, fight or flight at this point. I knew that I had to take care of my family, and I couldn't focus on numbers. It was literally just putting one foot in front of the other, and taking the time to meditate each morning, taking the time to spend time alone with myself, taking the time to actually get my mind in the mindset of it wasn't going to be about the numbers. I was only literally going to focus on the process, like day in and day out. July comes around, and I have people text me like, oh, I thought you were going to be done at this time. I thought you were only going to do 250, or I thought you were only going to do 800 accounts. And my goals just got like bigger and bigger. Like, yes, I was only supposed to do 250, and then COVID hits. And then, yes, I was only going to do 800. And it was like, well, you're only a couple hundred away from like the female record. Like, just keep going. And so we decided at July, like, okay, my husband and kids were going to come home, and they had to get back to school. And it became super, a lot of people in August, that's when people are taking their foot off the gas. That's when people are becoming complacent. That's when reps are thinking about home. They're thinking about trips. They're thinking about all these things. August, the reason this year was different than most, and I didn't feel a sense of senioritis, I guess, or I wasn't ready to go home, because I literally just focused just on the process. I was just focusing on Suli and being okay with who I was on a daily basis, like on and off the doors, that it just came. It was fun for me. September comes around, definitely a bit of senioritis, is like I see the 1,000 serviced account mark, and it was just kind of like, holy heck, I'm still like 100 accounts away. Long story short, I see what I knew that some of the guys who were trying to hit 1,000 had gone home, and I'm like knocking on the doors, and like my regional hits me and was just like, okay, you are not coming home without 1,011 accounts. And I'm like, holy cow, I'm in the 1,000 mark. And so knowing that the guys had all gone home, it was just like, okay, well, I'm not going to go home unless I'm like number one in the company. So I ended up staying a couple days, made sure that my 1,013th account was serviced, and then I booked my flight home. And I look back on the year 2020 and just saw all the people who were rooting for me, like just all the people who were just excited for my success. It just reminded me of the importance of how much I wanted to bring other women into the same success. And 2020 became that year where I definitely found myself a lot more humbled, in the sense of like, there is definitely enough space at the top for every single one of us. Like, this industry, although yes, it is male dominated, there is enough space for us here if we create it. Yes, that this industry is male dominated, but if we definitely make our voices heard, if we definitely allow, our input, to not find offense or to not take offense. I think the first few years of my door-to-door, it was just a lot easier, to take offense when, guys would say certain things, or team leaders would, accidentally, say this and this and that. But I definitely want to create a space where we're welcome too. And it's not that like men are any less than us, or, that we're any better than them. We're definitely equal. I definitely feel like we're in a space where we can definitely dominate this industry. And I'm definitely going to save my transition into why it was that I started doing what I'm doing now. But I'm going to end with the simple fact of just having so many of you women from different parts of the industry actually reaching out to me and actually like checking up on me like throughout this last summer was one of the eye-opening things for me on how much like women like in this space and in this industry has become my passion. Like, I want so much to see more people like myself succeed. And a lot of times we think that our success is like numbers based, and it doesn't have to be. Like, finishing the summer is success. Like, being alive is success. Like, being positive on the team is definite success. And so as I share a little bit of each year of, or a little bit, kind of a little bit of my last 12 years, the one thing that I'm hoping that you guys do get just from this episode is that things are going to be okay. Like, it's not, this job is hard, but what's even harder is not accepting yourself. Like, what's even harder is not knowing who you truly are so that you can find the space to find success here in the door-to-door industry. Like, thanks for tuning in and taking the time to actually hear my story. And I'll share my transition next time.